When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be hitting on our last part of our Robert's Rebellion series. We're going to get through a lot of material here, I guess, but it's been a great series. We've kind of covered all the way back from the War on the Stepstones and Aerys taking the throne, kind of some of his psychology, and then leading up all the way to the war and the events. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this series. If you guys want any other Robert's Rebellion type era videos, like if there's more stuff that you'd like me to clarify, let me know, and I may make a video out of it. But yeah, just let me know in the comments. But today's video, we're going to be basically doing the aftermath, right? There's no real other combat outside of like the assault on Dragonstone, which really wasn't that big of a fight or anything. But all the major kind of events have happened now at this time. So between this time in which we have the Trident, the sack of King's Landing, Ned leading a couple guys down to Dorne, we see an assault on dragons. And this is very important because Queen Rhaella and also her two children, Prince Viserys and also Daenerys, are going to be on Dragonstone. So if you're Robert, these are still a potential threat to your reign. You need them gone, or at least you need them to be prisoners. And so he commands Stannis to construct a new royal fleet to lead an assault on Dragonstone. Again, you got to remember, the one thing Robert lacked was he didn't really have good naval power, right? If you look at the Red Wines, they have one of the better fleets. They were with the Reach and the Crown. You look at the Greyjoys, they come into the war very late, and they're on the wrong side of the country. They were over kind of in the Lannister and the Reach side, so there wasn't really a clear fleet to take Dragonstone. And so Stannis began constructing this. It's very important. And you got to be thinking another thing if you're Stannis, right? You're someone that's just gotten done holding Storm's End for a long time. You didn't really get any of the credit for doing it. Ned got all the credit, really, for relieving the siege. Now you're tasked with doing dirty work again. Finding Daenerys, finding Viserys, and bringing them back to Robert. But another notable thing is that Rhaella will give birth to Princess Daenerys Targaryen, killing her in 284 AC during a great storm that not only did Rhaella die, but also destroyed the Targaryen fleet at anchor at the Isle. So, like I said, this isn't really much of a fight. The Targaryen fleet's destroyed. There's not much point of even protecting the Targaryens at this time. I would be thinking, if I was somebody at Dragonstone, and I think this is probably what William Derry was thinking, how much can you trust the men at Dragonstone, right? The king's dead, the prince is dead, the loyalist, army's gone, the Reach has bent the knee. There's no support left for the Targaryens. Those people would probably abandon Daenerys and Viserys, give them up to Robert. So, again, there's not really a lot to say here, but even when we do end up seeing, Stannis kind of take ship to Dragonstone. His fleet was ready, and they thought that they could take it, which they could easily. But before Stannis could, William Derry and 4 men smuggled Viserys, Daenerys, and her wet nurse from the nursery, which is huge, right? Because it saves the Targaryen dynasty at this time. Again, nobody at this time knows that maybe Jon's a Targaryen, maybe he's not, or that young Griff could be a Targaryen and Aegon survived. We just don't know at this time. The people of Westeros just don't know that at the time. In their eyes, the last remnants of the Targaryens are Viserys and Daenerys, and I guess Aemon if you want to consider him, but he's kind of been out of the picture for quite a long time. So at this time, we see them flee, and this is huge, because that's why Robert wanted Dragonstone more than just taking Dragonstone. Yes, it's the ancestral seat of the Targaryens. It's kind of like that final dagger taking Aegon the Conqueror's seat when he took over. But also, it was to eliminate the Targaryens, right? If he gets Daenerys and Viserys and they're killed or whatever needs to happen, well, the Targaryens are over. Nobody else is going to think about them ever coming back into power, but now there's still that lingering threat of Viserys still being alive. And we know people might actually rally to him. We know that there's a possibility that Oberyn was definitely trying to do that. And even when we see later on, when it comes to Quentyn and the pact that was said to be between Viserys and Arianne, it's quite clear that this did not mark the end of the war yet, right? There still was a possibility that the Dornish could try once again to put Viserys on the throne very quickly after the events had happened. And you also got to remember how the war ends. Sack of King's Landing is a big slight to the Dornish. Elia was the sister of the ruling lord at the time in Duran, and also she was a princess. And also you have to think about her kids, right? Her kids were, lined up to be on the throne after Rhaegar. It's a huge slight. The Dornish lost a ton of power in Robert's Rebellion. And so it's going to lead to an issue that we're going to see with this kind of Dornish resistance, which will kind of be the last part of the video. But after this, we also got to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to establish this new dynasty? We know Robert's going to become king, and we know, it seems like the Lannisters are behind him. The Greyjoys are kind of behind him. The Starks, everybody's kind of behind him. The Reaches bent the knee. Everybody's behind him. But how are we going to deal with the seats, right? Who's going to be Hand of the King? Who's going to be, all these other roles, right? And so we're going to see a lot of Robert just kind of keeping what was there and then adding some of his own. So right off the bat, we see Hand of the King being named to Jon Arryn, who basically was basically Robert's like father almost at this point. Makes a lot of sense. Seems like a very good choice. Jon Arryn raised Robert. Good choice. But something else we see during this time is Stannis. Stannis is made Lord of Dragonstone, something that is huge. Now, I've made quite a few shorts and even videos on this idea, but this to me did not seem like a slight. I think you look at Dragonstone and it was Robert wanting someone that could actually hold the castle. You got to remember, if there was a chance of the Targaryens coming back into power, they would attack Dragonstone first. It's their ancestral seat. It's where they would go first, especially coming from the Free Cities. Dragonstone is a logical place to land. It's where I believe Daenerys is going to land first as well. So you wanted somebody that's going to be able to rule over that island. Now, maybe Robert could have given it to some other, lesser lord, but he wanted somebody that he could probably trust. And Stannis never saw it that way, because Stannis and Robert just did not communicate properly with each other. Stannis saw it as a slight, and that's going to be a huge problem going forward with the War of the Five Kings. And also the idea is Stannis is now named the heir, right? It also makes sense in that terms that Stannis is Robert's heir at this time, right? Robert didn't have any natural born kids. He did have bastards, but at this time, he was the heir. So it did kind of make logical sense that Stannis should be given Dragonstone, but it would have ripple effects throughout the story. We also see that other people will be pardoned. Jaime Lannister would keep his position. Grand Maester Pycelle would keep his position. Lord Varys would be keeping his position, as well as Barristan also keeping his position. So again, we see a lot of Robert continuing with what was there, not taking everybody else out of power, just continuing what was going on, except he is now the king. And that would also have ripple effects, right? In terms of, okay, how will those people feel about a Targaryen coming over? How will they deal with Robert being king? How will these people stay loyal? There's a lot of that stuff there because all these other people already have kind of attachments to other people. Pycelle is a Lannister guy. It's very obvious that he is. Varys seems to have, not the greatest loyalty. So Varys might be somebody you wanted to get out. Even though he is very useful, he is someone very dangerous as well. But something else to think about here is at this time, right before Ned gets back to King's Landing, it's made very unclear what Robert's going to do with having kids, who is going to be the queen. He's betrothed to Lyanna, but Lyanna hasn't been seen in quite a long time at this point. So already I think the wheels were turning, right? I think Tywin knew that, yeah, he's going to try to put forward his daughter. It makes logical sense. I've already made another video on this. If you want to get a real in-depth, it's actually one of the more popular videos I've put out in the last couple of months, but there wasn't really a lot of candidates for Robert to marry. He could have married a Tyrell, but given that the Tyrells were against Robert during the war, maybe it wouldn't have made as much sense to do that. But then he could have united a definitely potential army that would have gone against him if the Targaryens came back. Who knows? You could have done that, but Cersei seemed like the obvious choice, and that is what ends up happening. But we know Robert had no wish of marrying, right? He was someone that, after the death of Lyanna, he was kind of heartbroken. It was the thing that reunited Ned and Robert, as they both loved Lyanna quite a lot. Now, Robert liked the idea of Lyanna, not actually Lyanna. They barely knew each other, it would seem, especially Robert to Lyanna. He barely knew who she was as an individual. But that would lead to Jon Arryn convincing him that he should marry Cersei. He needs an heir. And it made sense, right? I've talked about this with lengths. Cersei was described as being very beautiful. She was definitely described as one of the most attractive women during the time. Her marrying yourself to the Lannisters is a huge power position, given the alliance that was already being formed with the Starks, the Aarons, the Tullys. Adding the Lannisters seemed like a really good move because then you had the entire northern side of the kingdoms all kind of married into each other. In theory, it was a great idea. Now, because of Robert's personality, who he was as a person, wasn't the best move because Cersei herself, even before the wedding, wasn't a great person. But then Robert also being, not a great person to her also did not help. But Robert and Cersei would marry in 284 AC. And this would mark the start of the Baratheon dynasty. It won't last very long, but it is going to start it. But this is very important, right? Because Robert could not just have no marriage. He needed heirs, right? And he was also still very young as well. Because if he has no heirs, then it goes down to, okay, you have Stannis that can follow you and Renly. And if the Targaryens attack, Stannis might be the first one on the chopping block if he can't win, and Renly was just a kid at the time. So definitely needed to get some heirs. But that leads us to the last part of the Robert's Rebellion that I wanted to really talk about. I guess there's one other part that I want to talk about after the Dornish Resistance, but very interestingly enough, the rumblings of the Martells and the Dorne seem to be growing of more resistance, right? The Dornish had not bent the knee to Robert. And you got to think about when Oberyn dies in the main story. It's very similar, right? You have the Sand Snakes trying to start a war. It's the same idea with Oberyn. It seems like the Dornish were marshaling, regrouping to resist the Seven Kingdoms, or I guess 6 other kingdoms at this time. But we know during the time after the deaths of Elia, her children, of Lewin Martell, we know that Oberyn was trying to raise Dorne. He was trying to gain and rally support for the exiled Viserys. But the only thing that seemed to stop this was about a year after all this was happening, Jon Arryn went to Dorne the year after the rebellion. And we don't know what really happened. We know that the bones of Prince Lewin Martell were returned to Doran, but it seems unclear as to why this peace happened. Now, we can make our own kind of guesses based upon the idea of Doran, right? It seems that Jon Arryn was very closely questioned about the deaths of Elia and her children, which makes sense, right? You want to figure out why they died. They were innocents in this. Why did they get killed? And Jon Arryn can simply ask, or simply put the blame on other individuals. He can say it wasn't Robert, it wasn't Jon, or it wasn't Robert, it wasn't himself, it wasn't Ned. It was just a freak accident that happened during a sack. Right? It was Lannister men. He can put all the blame on the West, right? And I think it's quite clear that Doran was smart enough to understand they couldn't take on the rest of the kingdoms by themselves. Yes, they could break away, and I think that maybe that would have helped them, but they would never have been able to avenge Elia and her children. They never would have been able to take the throne without any help. And so I think they realized that, right? I think Doran realized, Oberyn, it's better to plot now, and plot for things to come later, get our vengeance down the road, and make it worth it, right? Where we don't all die trying to, just be on this path of vengeance. And that's what I think probably happened. I think Jon just kind of shifted the blame to others. And I think it's also a realization from Doran that didn't make any sense to really go to war at this time. So that kind of leads us to, I guess, the last thing I wanted to talk about, because I think it's significant, is Ned goes back north with Catelyn, with this baby Jon, with Robb. Well, Benjen ends up going to the Wall directly after this. As soon as Ned gets back, it seems like Benjen's off to the Wall. Why would Benjen be going to the Wall? The Starks right now are very undermanned, right, in terms of the Stark line of succession, right? You have Ned, and then after that, it's Benjen. You have Ned, and then after that, it's Robb. And then after that, you have Benjen. So Benjen right now is literally the second in line after Ned. So why would he take the Black? It seems a very bad time to do so. You think he might take it maybe a couple years once Robb has grown up and maybe Ned and Catelyn have more kids. But no, he takes it right away. It seems to me that Ned, whatever he found out at the Tower of Joy, it points to this idea that Benjen had some guilt. It was either something where Benjen had guilt over introducing Rhaegar and Lyanna and maybe knowing what was going on there and telling nobody, not even Ned, maybe help stop the war or help innocent lives be saved. And it's also could be a possibility that Ned told Benjen to go to the Wall, right? Because of everything that happened, because of those actions, because of those mistakes that Benjen maybe made, that could all be possible. Or maybe it's Benjen just simply, he didn't really feel like he had a place, right? Ned was going to become Lord of Winterfell. Benjen maybe didn't feel like he wanted to marry. And maybe he was consumed by grief, watching, having his sister die, who he was close with, his eldest brother, and also his father dying. His mother had died in the past years. We don't know exactly what happened with her, really, but maybe it was something where Benjen felt like he just wanted to get away from his home. His home didn't feel like his home anymore. And also he had to sit out the war. He had to watch as others died and all these things, and he could do nothing but sit back and watch. It's very similar to like Bran in the main story. But either way, this tale for now with Robert's Rebellion ends with Benjen going to the wall. But that is all I wanted to talk about with this series. It kind of leads us perfectly into the coming events of the Greyjoy Rebellion. If you want to watch that video, I've made a video on that. It's one of my favorite videos I've made on the channel, and leading us to the main story. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all have enjoyed this series, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.